Hey there everyone, Paler here, and welcome back. It's time for another Star Citizen 3.0 Alpha PTU video. And in this video, I want to go over the ground-based vehicles, just talk about my initial impressions of them, how I'm liking them, or which ones are having some problems as we move through all this stuff. As I did say, this is the PTU video, so some of this is going to change for the actual launch of 3.0. They've actually said in some of the recent ship shapes, things like the Ursa and the Nox are not quite finished. They're in the final stages, and you'll be able to see some of that here in this video, things that are hopefully going to be resolved before this pushes to the full 3.0 or somewhere soon after. I would say none of these are breakers to prevent the launch of 3.0. In fact, if they're holding back 3.0 for these little things, I would strongly disagree with that, but there's definitely some issues with all these vehicles. Overall, though, I just want to give you my impressions of these vehicles and how enjoyable they are planet side. And there's basically three. We're going to talk about four, though, actually, today. So there's the Ursa Rover, there's the Dragonfly, there is the Nox, I forget who manufactures the Nox, and then there's the Grey Cat Buggy. The Grey Cat Buggy is kind of a... Well, we'll start with that guy, because that was actually the first one I was able to get planetside. This footage is probably going to be a little dark. I'll try and lighten it up, but it was nighttime. And this was the first time I made it planetside without crashing or dying, and found a base that actually had a spawn pad that I could get these type of things. And I tried the Nox, Dragonfly, all these other ones, and they were all having problems. Eventually, I just spawned in the Grey Cat Buggy, and this was the one that actually worked. It worked right off the bat. Boom, it was there on the pad. I climbed into it, and off I went. Unfortunately, it was nighttime by the time I got all this working, so the footage is going to be dark. But I'll tell you what, the entire time I was driving this around on the planet, I had a stupid grin on my face. It was a lot of fun. It was quite enjoyable. There's just some charm to this, you're on this kind of weird alien moon, and you're just kind of going around, and things are a little wanky. They really are. The gravity is obviously not quite what you would expect. The suspension on the buggy isn't designed for the terrain you're taking it off. It's nighttime, so suddenly there's just rocks in front of you. You're trying to swerve around in front of the rocks. But I'm also looking at the skybox. I'm looking up at the stars, and it's like, wow, this is really cool. And it was one of the biggest highlights I've had so far with the PTU of this. This one is not one bought with money. Well, not bought with real money. You buy this through credits. So depending on your backer pledge that you put in, you have like 20,000, 30,000 UEC credits. I think this is like 12,000 UEC out of the store. And it's one of those ones where if you do buy it now, it'll carry over. So it actually deducts from your UEC. So if it is 12,000 and you add 20,000, I don't remember the exact numbers, you'll have 8,000 left over when you actually get in game. So it does deduct from your final wallet that will be in the launch of the game. Keep that in mind. I picked it up, though, to drive around in the hangar, because this is something you can spawn in the larger landing hangars, and you can drive that around in there. So I've had this for quite a while, and getting it out on a planet where it's clearly not designed to go, it was still quite fun. It does have 2 seats, so you could get somebody else in there. And most importantly, out of all of them, this one just worked. I've not had any problems getting it to work, so when all else fails, if I can get to a planet and I get to a spawn point, I can get the buggy out and enjoy it. Yeah, I kind of do recommend it for that, considering it's going to be something easily earnable in-game. If you want something reliable, you don't have access to a Dragonfly or a Nox or an Ursa Rover, here's a pretty good option just for something to dork around on the planets. It's nothing spectacular, but it gets the job done for some little fun. Let's go from there. We'll stay on the wheelbase vehicles, and we'll talk a little bit about the Ursa Rover. The Ursa Rover has been the one that's probably given me the most trouble out of what is currently available on the PTU. And it's silly because the trouble's all one set of doors. You have the side door that opens up, you have the rear door that opens up, but then there's another door that opens into the cockpit, into the driver house, whatever you want to call it. That door for me almost never works. It seems to be a ownership type thing where the game loses track of who owns the vehicle, and when you first spawn it, you might be able to walk up and that door just opens up. There's no interact button, there's no like switch you flip. You just approach it, it's got a sensor on it, like your owner opens up and then closes. But half the time, actually more than that, 80% of the time, it doesn't seem to register who owns it. So I walk up to it and it just sits there. Nothing I can do will get it to open. But I have twice now been able to get it to open, and that's where you're getting some of this footage from. Excuse me, it's early. I'm still, my voice still hasn't kicked in entirely. Once you do get into it and get it running, though, this thing is pretty darn cool. Watching it in third-person mode, watching the suspension adhere to the ground is really quite neat. I love how they've done the six-wheeled suspension, 3 on each side, on this thing, and watching it go up and down. It has a surprising amount of climbability, I guess is the word I'm looking for. I don't know what it would, like, hill climbing potential. It can go over a lot of rough terrain. You're not going to be driving it over some of these rugged rocks you see, but depending on how long this footage goes for the Ursa, I actually climb up this fairly steep, like, cliff-side face as I'm driving this thing around, and it does quite well with it. There is no type of, like, if we think back to the old Armageddon movie, there's no, like, space bar where you can maybe get a little bounce of air or anything off of that. No, it's strictly a ground-based vehicle. The speed on it is surprisingly high, almost too high to be used reliably. Right now, the throttle's kind of an all-or-nothing type of thing. You hold W, you're at full throttle. You let go of W, you're at 0 throttle. Now, there's a little bit of an acceleration point and a deceleration throughout that, but there's no way, unlike the spaceships, where you can kind of tap W and bring it up to 10%, 20%, 30% throttle, you don't get that. And I really think that's something it could use, because especially at nighttime, going full throttle, it's just way too fast. By the time the terrain is in your lights and you can actually see it, it's too late. So being able to run this thing at 50, 60, 70% throttle would be really handy. And I hope that's something they look at doing later on in order to kind of make this thing a little more useful. This would also be, it's better on planets like the ice one. What is that? Selene is, I think, the frozen one. That one is a little more useful for this guy just because the terrain's a little more forgiving. You don't have to worry about all these rocks and stuff. At least at night that would be. Daymar during the nighttime, this guy's a little hard to use. In terms of utility, though, this is by far the best out of all the ground-based vehicles we're going to have. You have the ability for, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I'm recording this all post. Obviously, you have driver, co-pilot, and then I think there's 4 rumble seats in the back. So 6. The seats can also be put up, so there's a little bit of cargo storage you can put in there. There's a locker where you're probably going to be able to store like either weapons or a spacesuit, like radiation suit or something. So yeah, overall utility of this guy is quite good. You also do have, from the co-pilot, you have the gun that comes up. Right now, the aiming of the gun doesn't seem right. There almost needs to be like a third-person screen you go into, like a turret screen, similar to the Super Hornet turret, I would say, where the driver can look all around to use the gun would be ideal, but it kind of just looks wherever the co-pilot is looking and shoots wherever the co-pilot is shooting, which limits its field of fire quite substantially to whatever's in front of you and only, up or down in a certain degree out the front windshield. You can't see anything way above you or way off to the right, way off to the left, which does really hinder that gun. If they do put in that remote turret type operation like the Super Hornet, that actually gives this thing reasonably good firepower. Obviously, we don't have a lot to compare it to. We don't know what other ground vehicles are going to be there. In the recent Friday... the Friday happy hour, they did hint that there are going to be some larger ground-based vehicles coming. So, if they're implementing light tanks or something like that, I don't know if that's what they would do. It's not going to compete with something like that, but, against infantry running around on the ground, this thing's gun will handle infantry fairly well, as long as they're in that forward field of view for that gun. Other than that, if they can get the door to function regularly, I would use this thing a lot. I would take it down, and it's fun to just kind of drive around, be like a moon lander, like whee, just bouncing all over the place, watching the wheels go in third person. I quite enjoyed that. It's just a shame that at least right now, that inner door half the time doesn't work. I'll also say that the Rover is surprisingly durable. I took out the railgun and was wailing on this thing, and with its shield up, it can take quite a pounding from that railgun. I also found one of someone was driving along on one of the moon surfaces as I was coming in with a Cutlass Black, and I guess they disconnected, they DC'd, because all of a sudden they were just gone, but the Rover stayed there because I was close to it. So I unloaded on this thing for a while with the Cutlass, and while it's so small, I had a tough time getting more than 2 of the lasers from the Cutlass hitting. I was wasting energy out of these Cutlass guns just wailing on this thing and doing very little to no damage to the thing. Eventually I did blow off one of the tires and blew one of the doors open, but the thing would have had a real good chance of getting away or fighting back with that turret if it could see me, just because of how durable the shield on the Ursa Rover seems to be. So that obviously is likely going to be rebalanced, but at least for right now, it's got some tanking potential with its shield. From there, let's go to the Dragonfly. Now, this is one of the ones that I was most interested in. This is the one that I personally own. And, you know, it's a speeder bike. You know, obviously, that looks really cool. And I kind of liked the two-person nature of it, the little more open nature of it over the Nox. Obviously, the Nox provides more protection for the driver, higher speed. But I'm not too worried about that protection. This thing's kind of small. To get hit while on this thing is going to be pretty rough. It's going to take some pretty good shooting at speed. So I wasn't too worried about the protection. I like the idea of the two-person on it. And just the aesthetic of it, I really like. Plus the retractable in of the front, how it's going to fold in a little bit to make it a little smaller when you demount it. In terms of problems, right now the Dragonfly suffers from one major problem, and that is the maglev doesn't quite read the surface terrain of the planet too well. It reads it, but it almost feels like you're 6 inches too close. It feels like you're 3 inches above the ground rather than 18 inches above the ground. Like, you should be another foot or so higher than you are in order to just give the suspension a little bit time to react. As it is right now, you get moving, and as soon as there's a substantial change in the terrain, the suspension, the maglev, isn't there enough to hold it, and you end up hitting things a lot. Now, this could be the maglev, whatever they're using for that type feature, but this also could be that you go really fast on this thing and the server's not keeping up, right? It might not actually be a problem with the Dragonfly itself. It could just be that the network communication and everything else isn't keeping up. So by the time the server realizes that there was terrain there on the client side, you've already hit it and you already taken that damage and done some, you know, whatever, knocked yourself out. The space bar on the Dragonfly will launch you into the air, though not very far. So it'll launch you up probably about 10-15 feet, give or take. It's, well, you'll see on the footage here, but you're only up for about 2-3 seconds, and then you come back down, and then you have to kind of give it a second or so to recharge, and then you get spacebar again and go back up. But you can hop over little debris, little terrain things like that. It doesn't work like a spaceship's takeoff. You're not going to hold it down and just break atmospheric entry, go into outer space, though you can use this in 0G, where it does work like that. In 0G, the Dragonfly works just like a standard spaceship, almost like the MPUV, the little cargo hauler things, works just like that in atmosphere. Down on planet side, though, it just gives you a boop, gets you up in the air, and then you come back down and you continue on your way. I want to like this thing more than I do. They just have to get the driving mechanics worked out on a little bit, get it a little higher off the ground, and I think it would be a lot of fun. But as it is right now, especially on something like Daymar, where the terrain is so uneven, it's unreliable to use. You're going to be bottoming out. You're going to be damaging. In fact, I ended up way up in outer space because I bottomed out. I hit a rock, which seemed to break some part of the levitation. And as the physics broke, I just kept going up. And no matter what I did, I could not get the ship to drop back down to the planet. So eventually I'm in low orbit, just continuing to fly off. And the ship didn't want to be there, or the Dragonfly didn't want to be there. But there was something broken on the engines or the maglev or something that just kept me going up. We'll throw a little bit of that footage in there right now, maybe. I'm hopeful for this one. There's a lot of tech, I think, to overcome in order to get it to hover at the right height, react the way it needs to be a reliable use vehicle. That's my one concern. The Ursa, with how the suspension, how it's on the ground, you know, if they fix that door, that thing's going to be reliable, boom, ready to go. It'll be a little annoying without the speed adjustments, but it'll be usable in pretty much any circumstance without any problem. This guy here, there's a lot more hurdles they need to overcome in order to get it to be reliable. So that's my one real concern there. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Nox. The Nox is, I think right now, the most incomplete one. And the reason I say that is I just went over all of this about the Dragonfly, its maglev, how it's hovering above the ground and all of that. Well, the Nox doesn't behave like that at all. And maybe it's not supposed to, but my impression was PlanetSide, it was going to hover, about that 18 inches or so above the ground, be super fast, a little more protection on your character and all that. That was my understanding of it. Right now, with how it's implemented on the PTU, it flies just like a spaceship. Literally, you hold down spacebar and you just continue to go up. You just continue to go up, you get going forward and all of that. And if you're going forward, you don't react to the terrain. You have to react using the spacebar, increase your elevation, or pitch your nose up to fly over it. But if you're just kind of trying to use it similar to the Dragonfly and just go straight flat across the ground, and you're not using space or control, you're going to just run into things because it doesn't read that way. But you can also just pitch the nose up and fly right in outer space. If you had enough fuel and enough oxygen, you could fly between planet to planet or moon to moon. It would take forever because there's no quantum, but you could do it with how it's currently implemented in game. With that said, this actually makes it right now the most easily usable to navigate around a planet currently available. Because where the rover has trouble getting over some, while it's got some pretty good climbing capabilities, there's vertical cliffs it just can't go over. The Dragonfly, as we just discussed, does not handle the terrain very well. This thing here, well, you're coming along and there's suddenly a big vertical cliff face, well, you just hold space down for a few seconds, you're above it, and you keep on going, just like any old spaceship. It works like a Gladius in atmosphere, maybe a little bit more stable. So it's definitely the most usable out of all of the options down on a planet side to get from A to B. Obviously, you don't have any cargo capacity like the rover. You also don't have the back seat like the Dragonfly or even like the buggy, the Gray Cat. But you got to get from A to B fast, and you don't have a spaceship, ground-based vehicle. This is currently the most viable one in there. That doesn't mean it doesn't have its problems. Right now, I've yet to be able to spawn this thing with it sitting upright. It always falls over. When the engines are powered off, it doesn't seem to know it's supposed to be sitting vertically, and it constantly falls on its side. Not too bad getting on it. When you first climb on it, you can still interact with the seat, get onto the thing, and when you first power up the engines, it'll then do, it'll drag itself and kind of bounce around a bit, but eventually it'll level out. The problem's getting off of it. When you come in and you go to stop and you turn it off and it falls over to the side, it likes to blow up on you because you're on it again and you're trying to get off and you got to kill the engine, otherwise it's just kind of float away on you. Well, then you got to get low enough to the ground, turn it off, but it doesn't want to be that low to the ground, and then it falls over, and if it's taking any damage, it's a tricky proposition right now. They almost have to put in like a new state where it's powered off, but at least it's balancing mags are on or something. I don't exactly know. It doesn't have landing gear. That would actually be another way. Give it some basic landing gear that folds down, a little kickstand or something. But it's like trying to land a spaceship without the landing gear. A spaceship with a very pointy bottom. Say something. I'm trying to think of one with a pointy bottom off the top of my head. I don't think of any, but that's basically what it is. A pointy bottom spaceship with no landing gear. So as soon as you land, because of the geometry of the Nox, it just falls over on its side. And that makes it a little awkward. That's the one big problem with the Nox. My guess is, though, in regards to this, that they've not put the correct flight mechanics in the code yet for it. My guess is eventually it's going to handle a lot closer to the Dragonfly on PlanetSide, and they just haven't moved, like somewhere there's an option that they didn't tick that when in gravity, when whatever atmosphere or whatever, use this rather than that. I might be wrong. Maybe this is how they intended it for it to use. If they do, it definitely does give it a leg up over the Dragonfly in terms of maneuverability, in terms of elevation and all that, which makes it good. All in all, driving around PlanetSide with these vehicles has been a lot of fun. I've spent, probably 8 hours at this point with different versions, different builds of the PTU, and almost all of that time was spent trying to get PlanetSide to either use these things or already PlanetSide using them for different reasons. There's been a lot of little bugs in terms of they don't always interact and stuff, so I don't want to get too far into that. It's problems that are being worked out, but when I have been able to spawn one, get one, and use it on a PlanetSide, it's been some of the best experience I've had in Star Citizen so far. It's been a lot of fun. There's just something, at least for me, that's kind of awe-inspiring of driving around on these alien moons and just, it's look at everything and we just go wherever we want, and it handles and feels really good when it's actually working. The problem is they just got to get it working reliably. And I think they are working towards that. We've had the 4th update for the PTU alpha. I think Evocati's had several more updates over that. But, you know, it's still likely a little ways away, unfortunately, for everybody else to be able to play it, which I disagree with, but they're not asking my opinion. So there you go, guys. Those are the ground-based vehicles. There's a 20-minute video covering all of them. Go out and get the Grey Cat Buggy if you haven't. It's a fun little guy, reliable. The others all have some problems, but they also all have their own positives and negatives included with them. All right, until next time, this has been Paller. Thanks for watching.